project, and it's, just to see what, maybe we'll figure it out. We're trying to do it in a way that doesn't harm people. There were organizations that were lifted up, and maybe one or two people at the organizations might have said something, so it might be easier, because we don't know how big some of these organizations are, to pinpoint that it could have been you, or you, or you. You know what I'm saying? So we want to make sure that, that we're not putting anybody in danger, but we do want to address it so that we can let these mainstream groups know that RJ leaders are paying attention to the way that women of color are being treated at these organizations, that we see that you're hiring Black and brown women and Black and brown folks, but what you're not doing is treating them like the experts that we say we are centering in this kind of grander scheme of what reproductive justice is. So come on, y'all good. So, come on, Trish, I'm gonna have you do your things over here. And so the way that me and Trish are going to do it, she's going to, give you some information about the data, and I'm just going to kind of sit here and just give a little bit more justification around what these slides look like. We'll have an opportunity for you to give some input because, some of you may have taken this survey. Come on in and have a seat. Some of you may have taken this survey, but some of you may have not, right? And if you didn't, we want to get some more input or maybe just get some more rich feedback. As much feedback as we can get. I mean, we're going to be very specific about, the feedback that we're going to give to these organizations. And then what those next steps for accountability look like, include with that, like maybe sign-on letter. I just want y'all to help us figure it out. I don't want to make a unilateral decision about how we're going to approach it. I think that's at the end of the day. We don't want to do that. Okay, come on, Trish, go ahead.
So, the first slide is we're going to cover is why we decided to do the survey, and we identified and observed an increasing number of narratives about women of color experiencing harm from white-led and mainstream organizations. And we definitely thought it was worth a little bit of investigation because the way white supremacy works is very insidious, and even in spaces where we're supposed to use these spaces as a vehicle for liberation, white supremacy can be very embedded even in those systems and spaces. And we wanted to hear directly from women of color or people of color and women of color about their experiences. And we definitely wanted to hold these organizations accountable for the culture of harm that exists. So we had a total of 86 participants that were women of color, Black, Asian, Pacific Islander, Latinx, Native American, and African. The age ranges were from 18 to 40. They had various sexual identities and expressions, and we had respondents from over 10 states. The demographics of our participants were 52.3% were African American women, 31.4% were Latinx women, 14% were Asian and Pacific Islander women, and 16.3% of our respondents chose an anonymous racial disclosure.
I feel like we still had about maybe 2 or 3% that were Native or Indigenous.
Yes.
Yeah.
And African.
Yeah.
And African.
Yeah.
So of our 86 participants, 60.5% were heterosexual, 14% were bisexual, 8.1% were lesbian, 10.5% identified as pansexual, and 20.9% chose a non-defined sexual orientation or expression.
Come on in.
So without naming names, there were about 25 reproductive health and rights groups identified during the survey. About 9 reproductive rights groups, 7 reproductive justice groups, 7 policy and think tank groups, and other was about 17, which includes NGOs, academia, environmental justice organizations, etc.
I'm gonna stop you here and say, like I said, the purpose of the survey wasn't necessarily to get any feedback on RJ groups specifically, to be honest, but I think what ended up happening was that you had advocates who were working for mainstream groups or used to work for mainstream groups and now work with RJ groups and had experienced either some level of harm in within their own leadership at the organization that they work with, or they experienced harm while working at those organizations from rights and health groups or other, policy think tank groups and NGOs in their community. So I just kind of wanted to give that a little bit more clarity around that. Okay.
So we asked our respondents to check the things that they had experienced while working with or for white-led and mainstream organizations. And those specific items include culture and work environment, PLC staffers, were they centered as experts in their work or in their organization? Did they feel like they were being professionally developed? Did they have opportunities for advancement? Did they feel like there was good intergenerational dynamics? And basically all of this, like all of this. So the next is our results, the top things that emerged from our slide or our survey. So 71.6% of our respondents said they experienced classism. 73.8% said they experienced tokenization. 80% said there was a lack of considerations of them as experts in their lived experience and community. And 83.8% of our respondents said they experienced racism.
Which, we kind of unpack racism, right? We're unpacking it this way, kind of in a stair-step type of way, right? But but we think that it's really important to lift up the fact that many of the folks, received their treatment. The way that it computed for them was racism, right? That they were, and what wasn't defined is whether or not it was a mainstream organization, like whether or not those supervisors or co-workers were actually white people, or if they were people of color who were non-black, who were imposing these particular kind of racial harms onto folks. So just kind of want to give a little bit more clarity about that piece as well, okay?
So the other things that emerged were elitism, and we had 63.7% of our respondents say they had experienced elitism. We had 67.5% say they felt they had experienced a lack of promotion. 71.3% of our respondents said they had a co-optation of their work or ideas without proper credit.
Ouch. That was a big one.
And 67.5% that said they lacked professional development.
Let's go back to the 71.3, right? So the 71.3 is, you will hire my black or brown self. You will, use up the contacts that I bring, the social networks that I bring into these organizations. I've had conversations even with Orisha, before Orisha worked for us, and other, women of color in my community in Memphis. I'm like, don't you open your full Rolodex to them? Don't you do that, right? Because what we've seen time and time again is, especially the brilliance of women of color coming into some of these mainstream spaces, and or the access of women of color. Come on in, and just pull up a chair. There's one right here. Okay, yeah. Or access, that women of color, people of color bring into these mainstream groups. You have to think about, the type of power that we bring into mainstream organizations when you're not only coming in from your community as an individual, but you very well may be the gatekeeper and or know the gatekeeper into your organization, into your community. And so, I don't know whether or not we're really using our full power and leveraging our full power with mainstream groups, with white funders, whatever. You know what I'm saying? How are we leveraging who we are and the contribution that we bring as people of color when we are working for these groups who, without us, couldn't do their work, right? So come on in. So let's keep going here. Oh, let's go back one more. And I think that it's interesting to see that the co-optation piece has a higher percentage than the damn lack of professional development. So you will suck up all my intellectual resources, and then you won't even necessarily develop me. And when I say development, I also mean what it looks like, especially from those of us who run RJ organizations, to be engaging women of color who do not work for for RJ organizations, who have been hired to kind of hold up their RJ-centered work and have never had an RJ training in their life. They have absolutely no understanding about what the hell reproductive justice is, and their only introduction about what RJ is in a very whitewashed, sanitized, sterilized way, right? And so then what ends up happening that mainstream groups kind of don't understand is when you do that, you pit women of color against one another, and you make us fight one another, because we're like, damn sis, you ought to know this, but we know that you don't have this language or analysis, right? But then it makes you look at the, at that organization's head, like, knowing that it's co-optation, you know, and knowing that it's tokenization more than not, that these folks are, you know, are gonna be working for organizations and with no knowledge, no information. But go ahead, Trish. Hey, folks who just came on in. We're just going over the survey data.
So here is what some of the women and people of color said on the survey. She said she was being read as mean and rude for being direct with colleagues. Another said, I was put on a performance improvement plan after explaining to my supervisor that I needed a mental health break and could not attend an after work hours event. Every little mistake was a justification for lack of promotion, training, opportunities, and career development. Someone else said white feminism reigns. Someone else believed themselves to be blackballed. And someone else added an acknowledgement of harm, willingness to change, willingness to step down if necessary.
So, you know, these were just some very interesting, you know, straight out of the word for word, you know, without saying who it was, but that I thought it was really interesting that we added the one about the white feminism reigns. I mean, looking at the way that not only white feminism, but patriarchy, period, reigns and is so deeply embedded into these organizations. You know, we just kind of wanted wanted you to hear what some of the folks like specifically had to say. Go ahead, Trish.
So accountability looks like, we asked our respondents what accountability looks like to them. And some of what came out of that was a creation of more opportunities for people of color's advancement and integration, and equity in treatment and compensation. Authentic inclusion and not tokenism, to respect and accept the lived experience as the expertise. Cultural sensitivity and awareness, so that includes an acknowledgement of their implicit bias and privileges, and best intent only assumed by best actions. Trust the people of color employed to work on behalf of themselves, and applying RJ as a practice and not just a talking point. Taking ownership for poor policies and practices, and having organizational awareness, and a human rights centered hierarchical structure in identifying and dismantling patriarchal practices. And also including that the board of directors should reflect the majority of their targeted base. Care and compassion, which essentially means humanizing your support staff.
So, you know, I think we understand that whole equity piece around treatment and around compensation, because just like we see the situation happening with black and brown youth getting harsher penalties in school, is the exact same thing that we're seeing, you know, in the kind of these corporate structures about, you know, staffers of color being disciplined, being reprimanded, being put on probation, being fired, you know, those types of things. What else? The respect and accepting folks' lived experiences, expertise. Again, you know, this for me just brought up that whole piece around, you know, it's cool for you, you know, to tokenize reproductive justice, and then you hire black and brown folks, and then when you get in there, all you do is give them your rule book or your playbook, and you send them out into the communities that they come from with a white way of getting the work done. That shit doesn't work, and it's not gonna ever work. You know what I mean? So, and we see this time and time again. More is more common, you know, than not actually, and it's I think it's also very common in situations. I think where we can't ignore it is when you have younger leaders coming into the work. You just graduated from college, you maybe have been in this work, you know, 6 months to a year and a half. You don't necessarily understand the fullness. I mean, reproductive justice is deep. It's got a lot of breadth. It's got a lot, you know. And so, you know, you think that you're in a safe space. You think that what you're being given, you know, like, is the way that the work's supposed to be done. And until you bump up against a me, you know, you might think that you were doing the damn thing, right? Or if you're working in the communities that don't necessarily, you know, have folks who are intentionally pushing back from the community, saying that the way that you are doing work or trying to do work with them is, you know, harmful, and or what are the ramifications of sending a black girl into a black neighborhood with a white framework? You are asking for her to get gobbled up, is what you're asking for, right? And for her to never be able to enter that community again for anything, not just for the work, but for anything. You know what I'm saying? So what does it look like? What danger are advocates being placed in with this very whitewashed way of doing our work, and being sent kind of to the wolves who are looking, they see your black face first, they see your brown face first, they're looking at you like, I know you know better than this. bring your ass up here asking me about what you talking about now, you know, type thing. And then that applying RJ as a practice and not just a talking point. I think, you know, we actually, when these groups hire women of color, people of color to work for them, and the folks don't have an analysis or don't even understand what the hell RJ means, or the definition of RJ is very rights-centered. To me, it just always exposes those you know, mainstream organizations, those grass tops organizations, for the liars that they are, for the co-opters that they are, for the tokenizers that they are, for the fucking thieves that they are, right? So it's I mean, we talking about straight up, you a thief at this point. And then the whole kind of human rights center hierarchical structure, because again, RJ is a human rights framework. And so what other structure should we be trying to employ in our organizations than one that is, you know, RJ centered? That board of directors piece, I mean, like more than 1 or 2 or 5 people talked about, you know, what's going on with the board. You know, like, you know, you, especially when you have an executive director that defaults to all of their decisions being made because the board said so. I'm gonna say this as somebody who runs an organization. Some of that's the truth, and some of that's a lie. Right. Okay. Some of that is us being able to leverage the fact that we have our board support on decisions that we make, and okay, you know, not to throw us under the bus, but to also say that some of that is a lie, you know, because we still have, many of us have way more latitude than I think that we're actually using to make sure that we're helping ourselves, our staff, and the base. You know, and people have different, especially, you know, I'm a founder, so I'm speaking from a place of privilege right now. Everybody's not a founder of their organization, and you know, when you're a founder, you get way more latitude anyway, because it was your idea, right? But when you're hired into an organization that already had a framework and an analysis and points or whatever, then it's not going to be the same. It's not going to look the same. You might not have the same type of power. So, you know, it can, you know, I mean, that can ebb and flow depending on who we're talking about. But, you know, I mean, I know of at least one instance, well, I can't even say one, but how many of you understand these instances where the executive director of the organization basically has kind of handpicked their board of directors to kind of do whatever the hell they want to do? And, you know what I'm saying? So you got that piece too. And then that care and compassion piece, you know, again, if you're doing RJ work, so why the hell are you working people like we're in a third world country? You know, why is it that people are that grossly underpaid, actually? Why is it that, you know, and I understand that, and I will say this, in, you know, on behalf of directors, like I get the fact that we don't get enough money to really pay y'all right. But sometimes we're just not applying the resources right, you know, or we just can't hire 15, we just can only hire 5, you know, and so it's a whole lot of dynamics at play even with that I can't necessarily just lay at the feet of the executive directors, nor can I totally lay at the feet of the funding community. But I will say that humanizing your support staff is something that isn't happening enough, right? People are, you know, maybe I'm guilty of it too, you know what I'm saying? So, you know, I don't know. But humanizing your support staff, knowing that they have real lives, and, you know, and something else I want to lift up. If the majority of the people that we serve who are impacted by teen pregnancy and STIs are people of color, then how, you know, and our parents, then who's doing the work? Parents, mamas and daddies, and you know what I'm saying, and parents are doing this work. So I just want to think about all of these kind of things that are at play, you know, that the very staffers that are working for organizations are just as in danger of being impacted by these daily oppressions, these daily lived experiences and oppressions that, you know, that impact our lives every day. Let me stop talking so much. Go ahead.
So what the data tells us is that a culture of harm exists for women of color and people of color and white-led and mainstream organizations. And the people of color do not have enough alternative employment options. And white supremacy is as much as part of our internal dynamic as it is a part of our external focus.
And y'all wonder why we losing? That's why we losing. That's why we can't trust each other. We do not trust our leadership. Our leadership does not trust us. Our funding community does not trust us. Even with that new grant, right? Piecemealing it to you and shit. You know, so, you know, so go ahead, Trish. There you go.
Now it's time for our group contribution, which is our exercise.
So before we do that part, okay, so before we, so how does some of this kind of land on folks? Like, what are folks feeling with some of what we shared?
So, I thought it was interesting that you said that we don't get credit. So this summer, I was in the New Jersey Department of Health. I was doing my practicum,